He thought he caught the faint odor of smoke on the forest wind. He ran toward it and came out from among the trees into a small clearing and ran toward the other side of the barren open space and stopped. The hounds were in front of him. One of them, at least. It came slinking out of the trees, snarling, its little eyes deadly, its hairless snout drawn back to flash its ugly fangs. He tried to run around it, and it was on him, knocking him over, slashing at him, and rolling with him, then jumping up. Dirk struggled to his knees. The hound circled him and snapped savagely whenever he tried to rise to his feet. It had bitten his left arm and drawn more blood, but it had not killed him, had not torn out his throat. Trained, he thought. It was trained. It circled him, circled, its eyes never leaving him. Pyre had sent it out ahead and was coming behind with his Tane and his other dogs. This one would keep him trapped here until they arrived. He jumped to his feet suddenly, lunged toward the trees. The dog leaped, knocked him over again, wrestled him to the ground, and almost tore loose his arm. This time he did not get up. The hound backed off again, stood, waiting, poised, its mouth wet with blood and slaver. Dirk tried to push himself up with his good arm. He crawled a half-meter. The hound growled. The others were near. He heard the baying. Then, from above, he heard something else. He looked up weakly into the small slice of cloud-streaked sky, dim with the dawning rays of the Hell-Eye and its attendants. The Braith hound, backing off from him a meter, was looking up too. And the sound came again. It was a wail, and a war yell, and a lingering, ululating shriek, a death hoot that was almost musical in its intensity. Dirk wondered if he were dying and hearing the sounds of crying Lamia in his mind. But the hound heard it too. It was squatting, paralyzed, looking up. A dark shape dropped from the sky. Dirk saw it fall. It was huge, very black, pitch almost, and its underside was puckered with 1,000 small red mouths, and they were all open, all singing, all sounding that terrible shuddering wail. It had no head that he could see. It was triangular, a wide, dark sail, a wind-borne manta ray, a leather cloak someone had cast loose into the sky, a leather cloak with mouths, though, and a long, thin tail. He saw the tail whip around once suddenly and snap at the Braith hound's face. The dog blinked and stepped back. The flying creature hovered for an instant, beating its vast wings with exquisite rippling slowness, then settled down over the hound and wrapped itself around it. Both animals were silent. The hound, the huge, muscular, rat-faced dog that stood as tall as a man, the hound was gone. The other covered it completely, and lay in the grass and the dirt like a black leather sausage of immense proportions. Everything was silent. The hunter's wail had stilled the entire forest. He did not hear the other hounds. Carefully he rose to his feet and walked, limping, around the torpid killer cloak. It scarcely seemed to stir. In the dawn half-light it might have been a big, misshapen log. In his mind, Dirk saw it still as it had looked in the sky, a black shape, howling, falling, all wing and mouth. For an instant, glimpsing only the silhouette, he had thought that Jan Vickery had come to rescue him, flying the grey Manta air car. The far side of the clearing was a choker tangle, thick and yellow-brown and very dense, but the smoke came from beyond it. Wearily, Dirk dodged and squeezed and pushed the waxy limbs aside, breaking them when he had to, and forced his way through. The wreck had ceased to burn, but a thin pall of smoke still hung above it. One wing had scraped along the ground, tearing a great gouge in the earth and felling several trees before snapping. The other jabbed up into the air, its bat shape distorted by fused runnels of frozen metal and holes punched through it by a laser cannon. The cabin was black and shapeless, open to the outside through a wide, jagged hole. Dirk found his laser rifle nearby. He also found bones, 2 skeletons twisted around each other in death's embrace, the bones dark and wet, still brown with blood and bits of clinging meat. One skeleton was human, or had been. All the arms and legs were broken, and most of the ribs shattered and gone. But Dirk recognized the triple-pronged metal claw that ended one twice-broken arm. Mingled with it, and just as dead, were the remains of whatever creature had dragged the carcass from the smoking air car out into the open. Some scavenger whose bones were black-veined and rubbery-looking, curved and very big. The banshee had caught it feeding. No wonder it had been so close. There was no trace of the leather and fur jacket that he and Gas had dropped here. Dirk dragged himself over to the cold hulk of the air car and climbed into its shadowed maw. He cut himself in a sharp metal surface going in, but hardly noticed it. What was one more cut now? He settled down to wait, sheltered from the wind, and hoping he was hidden from the banshee and Braiths both. Most of his wounds seemed to have clotted, he noted dully. At least he was only bleeding fitfully here and there, but the brown scabs that had formed were all crusted with dirt, and he wondered if he should do something to fight infection. It did not seem to matter, though. He pushed the thought aside and held his laser a bit more tightly, hoping the hunters would get here soon. What had slowed them down? Perhaps they were afraid of disturbing the banshee. That made a certain amount of sense. He lay down in the cold ashes, resting his head on his arm, and tried not to think, not to feel. His feet were bundles of raw agony. Awkwardly, he tried to lift them in the air so they would not touch anything. That helped a little, but he did not have the strength to hold them up for long. His arm was throbbing where the Braith hound had bitten him. For a time he wished fervently that he could stop hurting, that his head would stop spinning so badly. Then he changed his mind. The pain, he thought, was probably the only thing that was keeping him conscious. And if he fell asleep now, somehow he did not think it likely that he would ever wake up again. He saw fat Satan hanging over the forest, its bloody disc half obscured by a screen of blue-black branches. Nearby, a single yellow sun burned very brightly, a small spark in the firmament. He blinked at them. They were old friends.